Beware then of the wiles of this malicious beast, and take good care of not falling into its claws. The Quebec Gazette publishes an article warning its residents that a loup-garou is on the prowl and roaming within the province. We learn that there is a werewolf wandering about the neighborhood in the form of a beggar who, with the talent of persuading people to believe what he himself is ignorant of and promising what he cannot perform, has that of obtaining what he desires. It is said that this animal came by the assistance of his two hind legs to Quebec the 17th of last month and set out the following 18th with the intention to pursue his errand to Montreal. This beast is said to be as dangerous as that which appeared last year in Gévaudan, wherefore it is recommended to the public to be as cautious of him as it would be of a ravenous wolf. A little over a year later, the Quebec Gazette runs a small article in the paper's December 10th edition, relaying information that a beast is prowling the province once again. We learn that a werewolf, which has roamed through this province for several years and done great destruction in the district of Quebec, has received several considerable attacks in the month of last October by different animals which we armed and unleashed against this monster. And specifically, on the 3rd of last November, it received such a furious blow from a small lean animal that it was thought that they were fatal, as for some time it retired to its den to the great satisfaction of the public. But we have just learned, by the most unfortunate of misfortunes, that this animal is not entirely destroyed. On the contrary, it began to show itself more furious than ever, and makes terrible havoc wherever it goes. Beware then of the wiles of this malicious beast, and take good care of not falling into its claws. Tales of wolves and the loup-garou were not uncommon for those that came to live in the New World's French settlements. The loup-garou, well known within the folklore of French, Canadian, and European history, was said to be a person who could shift into the form of an animal, most notably a dog or wolf. In French Canadian folklore, this person could sometimes take on the shape of a cat, pig, owl, or calf. The presence of such a creature in Quebec may not have been all that surprising when you consider the three main elements that come into play with the publication of the Gazette's articles: history, religion, and the events taking place in Quebec at that time. France has had a storied history with Canis lupus for many years prior to the announcement of Quebec's own werewolf. The July 21st article calls upon this history, with the mention of Gévaudan, which ceases to exist, but out of which the now Lozère département was established. And between 1764 and 1767, it was the area terrorized by the beast of Gévaudan. For centuries, humans have feared and attempted to eradicate wolves. Much of that history can be traced through royal decrees and records of hunts. The beast of Gévaudan is one of those many instances. Nearly 2 years before the werewolf of Quebec made its appearance, a series of attacks began, and for some time, many were unsure of what animal was capable of and responsible for these vicious attacks. Though many have examined this case, analyzing records and archived items, details surrounding the events of Gévaudan vary between studies and interpretations of evidence, including the number of victims to befall this terrible beast. Some records indicate that over 200 attacks occurred, of which include victims that were partially eaten. Of those 200, 49 of them resulted in injuries, while 113 concluded in death. Some studies state lower but still significant numbers, with 60 to 100 people killed and over 30 individuals left injured. Most of the victims were adults and children that were alone while tending and herding livestock. As attacks continued, witnesses described the beast as having a lean frame, tawny or russet-colored fur, with abnormal markings on its belly and back, massive teeth, and a tail which was much larger than any wolf or dog. It was reported that the beast's demeanor was much like its appearance, audacious and ferocious. the creature would target the necks and faces of its victims, and along with the additional information that there were a high number of attacks and that reports were coming in simultaneously, it was theorized that there may be more than one creature, or potentially a pack. Many hunted these creatures, including men commissioned by King Louis XV, and there were several animals killed and sent to Versailles to be necropsied. And although there were successful hunts, the beast of Gévaudan was supposedly killed several times before the attacks eventually ceased. Due to their demeanor and the fact that these creatures' attacks focused on the neck and head of their victims, it was assumed these animals were afflicted with rabies. But of the 2 wolves that were killed and examined, neither was found to be rabid, and those who were attacked and survived did not contract the disease and recovered from their injuries. Although they did not have rabies, the behaviors of the beast of Gévaudan were quite abnormal. During the same period, other wolf attacks occurred across France, but none caused a similar level of terror or hysteria. In a comprehensive review of the beast of Gévaudan case, forester and zoologist C.H.D. Clark found that European herding culture showed that wolves were not deemed dangerous, and that wolf attacks were not expected. With no clear reason for the attacks, heightening hysteria, and due in part to its unusual markings, formidable size, and abnormal and seemingly unanticipated behaviors, it was believed that the beast of Gévaudan was possessed by demons and doing the work of the devil. Werewolves, those afflicted with lycanthropy, were believed to be cursed. In some earlier centuries, instances of transformation were said to only occur through the power of a witch, who was in the command of the devil. In French-Canadian folklore, the curse was said to be the consequence of being a sinner and lacking good Christian faith. The curse would last for 101 days, but may be undone if the person were to be recognized by someone, and if the one bearing the curse could draw the blood of an animal. Neither the cursed or the person that recognized them could speak of it, for they would face great repercussions if they did. Descriptions of the curse date back far within French history, as seen in the 1486 work Malleus Maleficarum by disgraced and excommunicated clergyman Heinrich Kramer. Malleus Maleficarum was condemned by theologians and became popular in part because of its condemnation, extreme views, and condoning of violence towards those deemed evil with no factual basis. In the book, Kramer describes 5 reasons previously discussed by Albertus Magnus for why wolves attack: famine, prey animals too close in proximity to humankind, fierceness, illusions of the devil, or God punishing those for their sins. Kramer ultimately outlined that for witchcraft to occur, there are 3 necessary elements: a witch's evil intentions, the aid of the devil, and the permission of God. Beasts such as werewolves were only an illusion to the eye of the beholder, as God was said to be the only power that could truly transform an entity. The curse of lycanthropy was consequently tied to witchcraft and evil. It was ultimately deemed a symbol of lacking Catholic morality. Though not long in duration, the condemnation of lycanthropy was an influential aspect of the European witch hunt period. That condemnation led to the persecution of those deemed to be guilty of taking the form of wolves and not upholding Christian values. There were many that fell victim to the hunt for witches and werewolves, but none more so fits with the details described in the Quebec Gazette's July 21st article than Gilles Garnier. A young victim was found outside of Dole, having been murdered and some of her flesh removed. In the following weeks and months, more victims were injured and murdered, with flesh from various parts of their bodies missing, and in some instances had full extremities removed. Some of the attacks were supposedly interrupted, though one victim would later succumb to her injuries. In another attack, the body of a victim was abandoned before the culprit could do anything further. This was deemed the work of a serial killer, which was not uncommon for the time period. They were referred to as werewolves, as lycanthropes were seen as working with or under the influence of evil. For those of that time period, there was no other understandable reason people could imagine for why such heinous acts were occurring. With multiple children missing or found dead, an edict was authorized, encouraging and allowing people to hunt the culprit. Proclamations such as this were normal to have been issued by provincial parliaments. They would often outline the steps to follow in the arrest and proper punishment of werewolves. In the 16th and 17th centuries, crime in rural areas of France was frequent. From a social, societal, and religious context, werewolves, or what we in the modern era call serial killers, were a major concern. With the aid of witness reports, a suspect was identified as Gilles Garnier. Supposedly having been caught in the act, Garnier was apprehended and was indicted on the crime of murder, which he was said to have committed in both the form of a man and a wolf. 50 witnesses came forward to testify, and after being taken to the rack, he confessed. Much of what we know about the Garnier case comes from political pamphlets. According to these documents, Garnier, a hermit residing in the outskirts of Dole, had recently married and struggled to provide for his new family. In combination with not being accustomed to feeding more than himself, feeling dejected, and in the midst of marital discord, he accepted the offer from a phantasm which was said to have appeared to him one night. After bargaining with the phantom, Garnier received a black magic ointment which allowed him to shapeshift. Now convinced he could shift into the form of a wolf, Garnier would go on to commit the crimes. After hearing witness testimony and Garnier's confession, his sentence was read by Henry Camus, Doctor of Laws and a counselor of the king. Gilles Garnier's sentence reads in part, seeing that Gilles Garnier, by the testimony of credible witnesses, and by his own spontaneous confession, been proved guilty of the abominable crimes of lycanthropy and witchcraft, this court condemns him, the said Gilles, to be this day taken in a cart from this spot to the place of execution, accompanied by the executioner, where he, by the said executioner, shall be tied to a stake and burned alive, and that his ashes be then scattered to the winds. The court further condemns him, the said Gilles, to the cost of this prosecution, given at Dole, this 18th day of January, 1573. There are some discrepancies concerning details and varying interpretations of the Garnier case brought forth by scholars, authors, and researchers. Author Barry Lopez details in his book of Wolves and Men that there was rampant hysteria and rigid religious ideology, which led to the condemnation of those that were deemed heretics, political enemies, sinners, or medically or mentally unwell. Many were labeled as werewolves for confessions that would have been given after undergoing immense physical pain such as torture, as well as emotional and mental pressure of feeling misplaced guilt and other forms of coercion. Based on Lopez's and other researchers' works, Garnier was said to have been a poor hermit who at the time of committing the heinous acts was not actually caught committing a murder, but instead was scavenging a body to feed his family. And, as was the fate of many condemned and executed during those old times, Gilles Garnier's only crime may have been simply being a beggar. And for that crime, his name would carry the burden of being ostracized, used as a symbol of what moral depravity looks like in human form, and spit with venom when discussed by people like Montague Summers, an eccentric Catholic priest impersonator and sympathizer for hunting witches, who wrote, "Hateful to God and loathed of men, what other end, what other reward could he look for than the stake, where they burned him quick and scattered his ashes to the wind, to be swept away to nothingness and oblivion." Aside from the long history between French Canadians and wolves, with the additional influence of religion, the events surrounding the years before and during the time of these articles being published may have been key in why the stories made it into the newspaper's print at all. Quebec, although not called such until much later, was a colony of New France, the territory colonized by France in North America. Quebec went through much change and turmoil from 1663 to 1759. This included the establishment of the Roman Catholic Diocese of Quebec in 1674, conflicts with Indigenous peoples, the banning of alternative religions, restrictions placed on Jewish and Black individuals, the establishments of policies on slavery, Queen Anne's War from 1702 to 1732, the expansion of New France itself, and the beginning of the 7 Years' War between France and the British Empire. In the following 30 years, and closer to the time of the article's publications, The 7 Years' War ended with the Paris Peace Treaty, in which France gave up the northern portion of New France. The territory became known as the province of Quebec in 1763 as it became a colony under British rule, and the American Revolution began. And in 1764, the publication of the bilingual Quebec Gazette by William Brown and Thomas Gilmore occurred. War, land skirmishes, socioeconomic disparity of francophones, individual rights restrictions, Catholic religion, forced cultural assimilation, and displacement all became important concerns for the people of Quebec and New France during these various years. All of these societal and cultural changes could have had an effect on the perspective of how the events detailed in the Quebec Gazette were written and interpreted by its readers. Those factors also could have affected how the initial events were perceived and how that information was relayed when provided to the newspaper's editors. Another result of all this unsettlement, which led to the publication of these articles and the revitalized fear of werewolves, may have been the increasing wolf population numbers within the region. It is quite known that wolf populations, once decimated by hunting and extermination, usually rebound when war or strife occurs in the human population hunting them. With an increase in wolf numbers, could it be that more sightings occurred, which in turn may have caused a certain level of renewed fear at varying degrees? The three elements of history, religion, and current events would seem to have had influence associated with the publication of the Quebec Gazette's articles. If we examine the articles with a new understanding of those three main factors, perhaps we can pinpoint key words and phrases that may also aid in shedding a different light on how to interpret the full article. The first article, published July 21, 1766, speaks of the werewolf taking on the form of a beggar and being capable of attaining what he needs or wants by way of persuasion. The newsprint closes out the article by warning residents to be cautious of this person as they would be of a ravenous wolf. Could it be that this person, who had little to their name, was simply just that, a person who was in need and hoping that there may be strangers who would provide a bit of help, monetary or otherwise, whether it be out of the kindness of their own hearts or by means of the beggar's own persuasion? And based on cultural, historical, and religious norms of how the then Quebec residents viewed those who were poor, disenfranchised, or presenting low morality, the subject of the article was labeled a werewolf, when in reality, they perhaps were just like Gilles Garnier, a simple beggar. Though the second article uses the term werewolf, it reads more like a wild animal than a person shifting from the form of a man to a wolf. From the use of terms like den, the phrasing of the village's animals being sent after it, and the lack of any human characteristics given to the werewolf, it seems as though it may just be a wild wolf or dog. But as we know, with the curse of the loup-garou, they do not look like what we commonly see today in our fictional and entertainment iterations. Those afflicted with the curse of the loup-garou do not appear as a humanoid wolf, but rather shift entirely into the form of one. While researching the Quebec Gazette, there was no further context given and no other references of a wolf or werewolf found after or before the publication of this article, with the exception of the July 1766 article. So we could be missing details or information which would have helped to better interpret this print. However one interprets these articles, the curse of the loup-garou was very real to those residents of Quebec and France from the centuries long gone by. And their belief in the lore of the loup-garou has had its lasting legacy passed on with the legend of the loup-garou. From Cajun folklore, the loup-garou's origins are rooted in many cultures that came with those that explored and settled in Louisiana. A majority of its lore ties back to the area's French settlers, as Louisiana and portions of land surrounding it were a part of New France. There are many variations of this lore, as every town and family has its own version, but the loup-garou is commonly described as having the body of a man and the head of a wolf or dog. It is said to prowl the swamps of Louisiana looking for misbehaving children. Some versions of the lore state that the loup-garou hunts down anyone that does not adhere to Lent, while other versions fall more closely to the loup-garou lore, in that the loup-garou is under a 101-day spell and can turn others by drawing the blood of unsuspecting victims. It's clear that the tale of the loup-garou carries with it the message of morality and obedience, once seen in the French-Canadian stories of the loup-garou. Whether real, a cautionary tale, or simply lore, the loup-garou has left its mark, giving face to what early settlers and those they left behind in Europe feared most: the unknown and the unexplained. Perhaps we have something in common with those of centuries past. Maybe labeling someone a werewolf or monster makes it easier to explain the horrible deeds they did, rather than face the real truth, that the scariest thing about evil is that it looks just like you and me. Thank you so much for watching to the end of the video. I hope that you enjoyed this one as much as I did in creating it for you guys. The Beast of Gévaudan and the loup-garou are two very interesting cases, and there's so much that comes with them that you can continue exploring and continue to find new information. So I hope that you really enjoyed them as well. A little update about the channel. There is a link for a Google form in the description down below. You can click that form and submit your questions or ideas for folklore, paranormal things, cryptids, anything that you would like to see covered on the channel. You can just go ahead and click that link and then submit that there, and it may pop up on the channel one day. And besides that, I guess I should do the YouTube things and say, please like and subscribe and share the video if you enjoyed it. I really do appreciate when you do that. It helps me and the channel. And seeing all your comments as well is just an amazing part of creating these videos and sharing them with you guys. So thank you again. And until next time, stay safe and stay spooky.